Hi, folks, and thanks for tuning in to Dragon's Teeth today. I'm Rob Whiten, and as you can see, I'm joined by a special guest. It's Liam Mills of Sealight Studios. Hey, Liam, how you doing?
Hey, yeah, not bad, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, all good, all good. And
Amazing.
we had a chat. It was Bedford Games Expo last year, I think,
Been
wasn't it? We
last year,
had a chat.
yeah. So we met briefly, didn't we? Really good convention. Yeah, I love Bedford. It's really fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a 2 day event put on by Robin at Hobby Hive, the local shop here, and I think it's coming up middle of March, something like that. It's a few
Want to
weeks'
say
time,
something
isn't
like
it?
that. Yeah, it's been about a
Yeah,
year. So yes, I think
yeah.
probably mid-March. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll put a link to it below anyway in the show notes. So perhaps we could start by you telling us a little bit about your background and how you got into gaming, that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so in terms of how I got into like tabletop as it currently stands, that was probably going back to uni, where a friend of mine had put together like a very basic hack of what was then brand new fifth edition D&D. We're kind of like very bare bones put together this game, and then from there, I dabbled a little bit in game design whilst at uni as well. And it was a couple years. Well, it was just during the very first lockdown. I had all of these home games that I'd been running, as I think a lot of people did back in the pandemic. And I was like, I could probably, with like a decent amount of polishing, start putting these out there. So I began with some fifth edition like mini modules, and then started building my own system, which was very bare bones. I'm not by any means a crunchy designer. I really can't be bothered with all that. Um, and then yeah, that became what is now the right hand path system. Um,
Right.
and then, yeah, kind of from there, I've taken a bunch of influences from a bunch of different places. I'm very into, at the minute, I'm very into the kind of OSR, going back to the kind of old school, quite gnarly stuff.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
I will always have a soft spot for 5e. I think as a lot of people who got into the hobby via that avenue will.
I
Yeah.
think the vast majority of us, D&D was the very first thing, wasn't it? Whatever edition it was, according to your age. Like
Yeah.
it's yeah. And
We-
do you think that's a current trend in RPG rules? I'm just starting up a mothership campaign
oh, great. Yeah.
in a couple of weeks. And again, you've got like three or four stats.
Yeah.
There's no total. I'm also involved in a role master campaign as
Mm,
well, which is the complete opposite.
yeah.
You roll to see if you eat your breakfast and everything.
I saw with ADHD, I do have to roll to see if I eat breakfast most mornings. So that's not that unusual as far as I'm concerned. Um, yeah, I do see it as a trend actually. So I was talking to the game designer and actor Todd Stashwick about this. We kind of noticed a kind of swinging away from fifth edition, which it has. I don't know if you kind of encountered this, but D&D has kind of become a sort of almost GURPS-like in that it is
Yeah,
a fantasy game ostensibly, but it has broadened its rule set so much that it has no direct design identity anymore. If
right.
you go back to earlier versions of Dungeons and Dragons, they are very explicitly, fourth edition and 3.5 especially, are very much like the design identity of this game is violent, dangerous, risky. You're supposed to die in the first session. That's the point of the game. And like this is reflected in the rule systems, in the way damage is dealt, in the way that you experience interactions and hazards and whatever you. Whereas more modern Dungeons and Dragons is designed to be a lot more flexible, much more malleable. I think it has been
Right.
designed that you can kind of plug and play a lot of different things in the way that GURPS was originally designed to do.
Sure. Sure.
Um, and what when we were talking when I was talking to Todd about this, we were talking about how we're seeing the pendulum switch back towards design-led narrative rather than narrative-led design, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
We're
Yeah.
starting to see games that where the actual design mechanics are reflective of the world that the game takes place in, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a very interesting thing. I mean, that's become something of like my rationale when designing games, certainly.
Right. Right. I think perhaps it reflects. I mean, I first, well, probably AD&D was our main first thing, And to be honest, I almost think D&D grew out of tabletop wargaming, skirmish game, where, so it was very, very combat orientated. And
Definitely.
a lot of those early modules was just us going around slaughtering hill giants. And
Yeah, exactly. I'm an avid collector of Dragon magazine. Um, what you notice in like the 80s is this kind of switch from very combat-led campaigns, which are, there is a horde of goblins and you wipe out the goblins, that kind of thing.
yeah, yeah,
It goes from that, and very suddenly there gets this like, well, why not try something novel? Why not try diplomacy with the goblins? Why
yeah,
not try
yeah,
communication? Or like, there's a whole bunch of stuff for AD&D that's about like trade routes and trade capacities and like what from those old skirmish games can we kind of abstract from? Because warfare doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's
sure,
always kind of associated with other socio-political events,
yeah.
and you start to see AD&D beginning to modify itself to kind of match that through line, which is very interesting to watch that shift kind of happen. I say in real time. This is over 40 years ago now, but you know what I mean. Like,
In my mind, it's 20 years ago, but yeah, I'm often reminded.
I apologize.
Yeah, and I suppose that sort of started with when you got to 10th level or whatever it was, you got a retinue and you could build a castle,
Yeah.
and suddenly you're involved in negotiating with the local barons and all that kind of stuff, I
You've got
guess.
henchmen now. Like you've
Yeah,
got yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there that is about like what about stock? What about trade? Like,
yeah,
what is your place in the economy of this world? Which I will admit, I have absolutely zero interest in. I
yeah,
am not that kind of player generally. I'm much more interested in the socio-political aspect of it in terms of like negotiation and communication, that kind of thing. But it is really interesting to see how, again, this game has kind of grown out of that very early combat focused design rationale.
yeah. So, what were the main sort of ideas for your own system? I did notice on your website you mentioned British folklore in particular. I think we're particularly blessed in the UK. I'd often say you can't throw a stone without hitting a ghost or a ruined castle
Oh
or
yeah.
something. So is
Depending on
that
where you throw the stone, you'll hit three.
in one go? Because it just goes through the ghosts, you see.
Exactly.
So
Very little. There's very little resistance on the way. Yeah, that's so. Yeah, I am a folklorist. In addition to being a game designer, and we could not be more blessed in the UK because we are a multi-colonized and a post-colonial state in the UK. We have both colonized other cultures and brought their cultures back with us. And we, in our very early days, especially, we were colonized by, empire after empire after empire. You had the Brythonic Celts originally, then
yeah,
they were conquered by, or you had the Gaelic Celts, and then they were conquered by the Romans. Then
yeah,
the Romans buggered off, and you left the Brythonics. Then the Brythonics were conquered by the Angles. The Angles were conquered by the Saxons. The
yeah,
Saxons were conquered by the Normans. And it just over and over and over again. Then the Vikings come in for a bit and they bugger off again.
yeah,
So we end up with this like really interesting hodgepodge. And these same myths are reflected again and again in different little places. So Kingbreaker, the system I've been working on recently, is built around the kind of very classic myth of the king under the mountain. You've probably heard a version of this,
right,
the
right,
idea of, there is a great leader, a military force who, upon their death or like their kind of apotheosis, retreats into hiding, only to be reborn or like resurrected in a time when they are needed most. Right?
yeah,
You get this with King Arthur. This
yeah,
is, you know, all manner of Welsh culture heroes, Finn MacHale
yeah.
in Ireland. You've got all these different kind of figures retreating and then returning. And it kind of began as a joke almost, right? What happens if they all come back on the same day, right? Like, what
It's
if
very,
you've got
very sort of Terry Pratchett-esque.
exactly like, you've got this like all these like great grand leaders who are just like, no, this is mine. I called dibs on this one. Um, and then Kingbreaker kind of spiraled out from there, where you now have these six kings who have been resurrected. There were probably more before them, but it's now been whittled down to these six. And because they can't die, they're just waging this endless war against one another.
Nice.
And then the player character is, and because the way my games work, they're usually two player, so the player character is always singular, and then you have the GM who is representing this world. But that
Excellent.
one player character is destined to wipe these kings out and stop this whole bloody mess from getting any worse. Um, and that's also a very folkloric thing, a figure who is kind of cursed by their destiny. They are forced to do awful, terrible things because that is their duty. That is
Yeah.
their like honorable duty. We have Sigurd in Norse mythology, who is destined to defeat the dragon Fafnir, only to be betrayed by his friends. You have Beowulf, who is destined to become the great uniting king of the Danes, only to be wiped out as an old man. Like I wanted that to be like a kind of through line of this game. Your player character is
Right.
powerful, but they are tragic. It
Right.
sucks to
Right.
be them,
Right.
but they are still the best equipped um to do this. They're still the best equipped to take on this destiny.
That's quite a strong thread in a lot of mythologies, and in particular, sort of Northern European, that aspect of it. It's your weird, it's your fate,
Your
and
gaze
yeah, yeah, and even though you know it's probably not going to end well, but that's what you do.
is part of the course. You have to do it.
Yeah,
There's no, I mean, it's also very Greek in a way as well, right? Like
yeah, yeah,
Oedipus is
yeah.
this great destined king, but by attempting to defy prophecy, he ends up kickstarting it, ending up shagging his mom and plucking his eyes out. Like, if I could be crude. But yeah, definitely a recurrent thing. And I think there's at least part of that of this which is a response to things like, your fifth edition kind of superhero player characters, which I do
Right,
like. But
right.
there is definitely something about your character in 5e has superpowers by like level 4.
Wow.
They are on par with like comic book heroes, right?
Yeah,
Because they're supposed to be
yeah.
folkloric heroes from a very early point in the game. Um, I wanted that level of power, that level of like strength and resilience, but also this kind of tragic aspect to it. This isn't a blessing. You're still being thrown around, murdered on a daily basis, but you are still forced to get back up again.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, it's definitely a bit
Well,
of Dark Souls in there as well.
well, yeah. I mean, it ties in with those. We've got those different strands of fantasy as well. Your high fantasy, though. I mean, Tolkien drew on those similar myths as well. So again, his heroes are by no means perfect. Whatever.
Well, the
Uh,
sword all the time.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and I guess at the other end we've got the more sort of sword and sorcery, grimdark elements where yeah, you might be the hero of the story, but you're also a bit of a bastard,
oh,
actually.
totally. God, I've been re-listening to the audiobooks for the for Conan.
Mm.
God, he's a dreadful person.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Fantastic. Like the entire time is like, oh yeah, no, this like great and mighty warrior is at his core a burglar. Like
yeah, yeah,
nothing more than to steal other people's stuff. It's easier than him doing it himself. Like he's a dreadful person, and
yeah.
it's fascinating as a result.
It's quite funny because I've been a Conan reader for many years, and my wife's never read it, but she's into audiobooks, and she did listen to. I think it was Red Nows. There was an audiobook version of that,
Yes,
and
yeah.
what she noticed was, oh yeah, someone talks about pirates. Oh yeah, I was a pirate king. Then someone talks about thieving. Yeah, I was the best thief in
Yeah.
Zamora, and
Yeah.
just
It's
like
just
done
got this
everything.
like wonderful CV of like deplorability. You know, just just constant crime after crime after crime. It's wonderful. Yeah, and you've got Elric as well from Moorcock,
Yeah.
another awful figure. Like, and he's a huge influence on AD&D specifically. Obviously, you have like Drizzt Do'Urden, who is
Oh, of
almost
course.
identical in a lot
Yeah.
of ways to
Yeah.
Elric and Melbion. Uh, but yeah, again, this very sort of like tragic hideous figure who is still honorable, still notable, still powerful. Yeah, these are definitely points of reference for my games generally and for Kingbreaker in specific.
So that's the general setting and outlook.
Yeah,
How about the mechanics? How did you develop the mechanics? Did you draw on other ideas, or
yeah,
it's difficult to come up with something
yeah.
truly
That's
original? I guess.
fun, right? Yeah, with Kingbreaker. So I've always worked on a very simple 2d6 system because I am at my core a very lazy person. I am chronically terrible at maths, and I like telling stories. So I wanted the system itself to be quite simple in its like moment to moment usage. So 2d6, quite simple, divisible numbers that you don't necessarily have to worry about. 2d6 is perfect because they are divisible. They are divisible by so many different in so many different ways. So you can really kind of get quite granular with this very simple system. Um, the big hook for Kingbreaker, that and one of the very earliest ideas I had for it was your character creation is built around building your character's coat of arms.
Oh,
So
right.
yeah, so
No.
you have your shield, which represents your like your the armor that you wear, so your health and your total stamina, I guess. They're called vigor in this setting.
Yeah.
You have your mantle, which is your weapon. The kind of the if you look at a coat of arms, they'll usually have like a little a weapon at the bottom, a
Sure.
wand or a knife or something along those lines,
Yeah.
saber. You've got your helm, the little bit at the top of the crest,
Yeah.
which denotes your lineage, your background. Were you a preacher, or were you a mercenary? Were you a king who has been deposed in this process? And then you have your aspects, which are the two animals on either side of your mantle. And they determine the kind of spells that you already know going into the game, the kind of abilities that you already have. And with those, I mean, one, two, three, four, five, well, those five elements, you then have all this customization that you can then go into. You know, your mantle, for example, will deal different types of um, like ailment damage, sort of like status effects.
Right. Right.
Swords will cause the enemy to bleed out, whereas maces will break down their armor. Wands will attack their mind and not their body, that kind of thing. And they all have different effects once they build up to a certain point. The aspects, for example, all have these incredible abilities, but a lot of them are based on reducing your stamina permanently for the rest of the battle.
Right.
So you kind of exhaust those stamina points to to do these like quite big, quite high risk moves, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted this very customizable system that also kind of in its process brought you into the setting
Sure.
because coats of arms are so evocative and like they have this language that you don't really know unless you spend decades studying it. I have book after book after book on this. It's, it's arcane. It's completely
Oh,
arcane.
it has its own language and symbology and everything else, right? Down to colors and shapes and everything. Yeah.
Even things like, so for example, dogs are in Western culture obviously associated with loyalty, bravery, compassion. In the modern world, we associate them with comfort and companionship. In heraldry, despite all of that, they are associated with filth, destruction, cannibalism, mortality.
Oh,
Because there were kind of only really two dogs that you had in the medieval period as like a wealthy person, a hunting dog or a street dog. Your hunting dogs were obviously the companionship, the loyalty and stuff, but
right.
the majority of the dogs that you were actually out in the world were eating crap off the streets.
Sure.
And
They're feral, basically. Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So they become in this symbology of the coat of arms awful monsters. So in Kingbreaker, taking on the mantle of the dog, for example, this aspect of the dog allows you to become a cannibal in the game. It gives you a power up where
Excellent.
yeah, if you eat a corpse, you regain health. That sort of
Brilliant.
yeah.
Brilliant.
There's all sorts of little kind of references back to medieval folklore. Whales are a big thing in medieval folklore. And again, whilst in the modern world we associate them with like serenity,
Mm,
age, beauty, wisdom, they were monstrous. Like they were almost like fairy tale monsters to
yeah.
the medieval world
Yeah.
because they were only ever seen wiping out ships. Like you only ever
Sure.
saw a whale if it was about to destroy a ship. Um, and in the folk texts of Christian medieval society, you have this idea that whales are like the open mouth of hell.
Wow.
This, yeah, this great vast hell maw that yawns open and sucks in and then eject out this vile toxin. And that's is probably in reference to spurting out blowholes and everything like that. So in Kingbreaker, what you do is with the whale, you trigger it, you release a miasma across the battlefield, and both you and your enemy take the same amount of poison, and then you just have to make sure that you kill them before they can kill you.
You
But
just need a few more hit points. Just
exactly, yeah, you level
nice.
the playing field.
Nice.
Very underhanded, very like sort of sinister in the way that you play it.
Well, I have to say, having opened that question with, I don't think you can think of anything original. I have to say, that sounds totally original to me. I've never heard of anything like that. That sounds amazing. Really great idea.
Thanks, yeah. You say there's nothing original. There isn't anything original. This is all going back like 700 years or so.
Well, yeah, I suppose in that sense,
Yeah,
yeah.
there's
Yeah,
definitely precedent for this. I suppose it's not been gamified in this way.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Um, and it seems ripe for gamification, I suppose.
yeah.
These are, in a manner of speaking, a family's character sheet, right? Like that's all a crest of arms.
Right. Yeah.
So it actually does. There is like a logical leap there that is quite easy to make. I'm honestly kind of surprised that no one has done it before this. I
Yeah.
think perhaps technology was quite prohibitive in that you had to rely on a person's drawing skills to kind of create these crests and coats of arms and stuff.
Sure. Sure.
Um, Whereas one thing perhaps looking at doing much further down the line, perhaps like we're in the beta stage of Kingbreaker at the minute. But as we kind of move towards the final release, introducing apps that can be used to create and build your
Oh, you
character.
can build your own one. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that brings us on nicely to the third leg of the chair, I suppose. We've got our setting, we've got our mechanics, art and design.
Mm.
And one thing I really like with the artwork you sent over is medieval skeletons in armor. I mean, you can't go wrong with that, can you?
Oh yeah, man.
I mean, that's you know, Hieronymus Bosch and the Triumph of Death and all those kind of great old paintings.
I am a huge fan of heavy metal. I always have been. Old stuff as well, like going back to Ozzy and Sabbath, going
Yeah.
back, Motorhead. And I love like really dirty, grungy sounding stuff that was clearly recorded in like an insane person's basement somewhere. And like the prog movement and with like these like really grand orchestral uh texts being reduced in these like really grungy, nasty sounds. And that's what I wanted to create with the artwork for Kingbreaker.
Wow. Yeah.
The art for Kingbreaker uses three colors, black, red, and green,
Yeah.
throughout the whole thing. And it's always the same black, the same red, the same green. Um, then there is like a lot of texture on top of it. I use a lot of artwork from the medieval period and then kind of like rip it apart and stitch it back together
Right.
using kind of programs and stuff.
Yeah.
I layer over with halftone effects to kind of give it that um, 1970s heavy metal comic book kind of vibe. Um, when I was first describing this, the way I described it is I want it to look like you've stolen your older brother's gaming magazines and are flicking through it. Like, God, this is like laying down fundamental aesthetics for me in some way. Like I wanted to as you're kind of flicking through, it's like, oh yeah, I don't get the context behind this, but I like it.
But it looks good. Yeah.
It's
Yeah. That's what pulls you in originally, something, because that's the first thing you see generally in it. I think it's so important in games, even now. I've been downloading a huge amount of PDFs for Mothership, and there's a ton of stuff, and it's really good. Some of the design and artwork is great. Funnily enough, the most expensive thing I bought recently, which is like a sort of city guide,
Mm,
had the most terrible design and artwork. You know,
yeah.
8 different fonts on one page, yellow on black, tiny tech, also just a real mess.
It does.
Um, and I suppose I take you self-publish all your stuff,
Yeah, everything comes through Sealight Studios.
right?
So yeah, Kingbreaker included. I've got a couple games that have been published elsewhere, under different titles and stuff. But yeah, everything comes out of
Yeah.
Sealight Studios. Yeah.
Yeah, so I do the same here. I mean, I've had stories published in anthologies, but most of the books we put out, and just recently I put out my first set of rules, actually fantasy skirmish rules. We want the
Oh, sweet.
gold. I'm
Yeah.
very lucky because my wife is a talented artist and graphic designer. But
So
one thing, even with just a plain paperback, your cover, everything else, you want to get that sort of uniform look and feel, I think.
one of the first bits of advice I got, so again, going back to Todd Dashwick, we met after a convention and we just sat in the pub and he was going through my stuff and he was like, right, the first thing you need to do is get a font. Like work
Yeah,
out what your font looks like. He was like, get a font guy or design your own or just license a good, clear font that is evocative of this setting but is very readable. Maybe do that two or three times. Have a heading font and then a body text font and then like a, very clear sans serif for things that kind of have to be understood.
yeah.
Beyond that, that's all you need. You don't need to, like the one that always comes back, and this is a very bizarre reference, but Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze. Are you familiar with the logo for Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze?
It doesn't spring to mind.
Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze has four words in it, and there are four different fonts in it.
Oh no.
It's fascinating. And it's, yeah, and like that I always go back to, right? You don't want anything looking like the logo for Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze. Um, So yeah, like really like pulling back, and I'm a very maximalist designer, and my own artwork is very grungy and stitched together from all these different places, and I like big bold colors. So it was actually quite a challenge to really pull back and only use three colors and a very strict set of sources
Mm,
for the artwork itself. But it does create this cohesion throughout the whole text. As you're flicking through it, it's like, oh, I can see the through line of this artwork and it kind of knits the whole thing together.
yeah, yeah. And again, that's a fairly recent-ish trend in design with Morkborg and these kind of things. Scene design, which again can work very well, but sometimes I feel they're putting the design a bit in front of the readability.
Hugely. I am a big fan of Morkborg on an aesthetic level, and I don't know if I'll ever actually play it purely on the basis of it is a difficult read. Like it just is. And
Yeah,
they've done some great work putting out accessible texts and stuff. And I think that's something we're going to see a lot more actually as designers kind of move through like disability discourse and what have you. We're going to see
sure.
more accessible text. I myself how I work in accessibility as my day
Right,
job.
right.
And one of the things I'm planning on doing when I have Kingbreaker kind of in a place where I'm happy to publish the finished edition is I want to put out a dyslexic, dyspraxic friendly, pure readability focused text. Still
Yeah,
have the artwork, still have the kind of the core feel of it, but taking out colors that might be distracting or difficult to pass.
yeah.
Red and green is, I mean, you can see where I'm going with this. I chose red and green, and it was only about, this is my job to think about this. It was only about a year in, I was like, oh, if you're colorblind, you can't distinguish those colors.
Exactly.
Dick. I'm such a knobhead. Like, yeah, so I'm planning on going back and like modifying colors and stuff like that as well, kind of making it a lot more readable. Um, if you go on forums, there was often a discourse between like readability and aesthetic-led design,
Yeah,
and you do see generally speaking, the pendulum swing more towards readability than aesthetic. I think people bring their own aesthetic to games, and if it's a game that has this very strong aesthetic, they come to this game because they like that aesthetic, but they are still going to modify it in a way that suits them. Whereas in order to do that, they need to be able to read the thing first. I think, yeah, that's really important.
exactly. Exactly. And print it out as well. As I say, that recent Mothership one I got. It's got some great stuff in there, but I bought the PDF. So, okay, I want to print this table out. Right. Well, the background is black. Then there's a yellow strike across the. I'm never going to. It
Yeah.
probably cost a fortune, but they don't provide. A lot of them now will provide a print version,
Yes.
plain text, but they didn't do that, which is the thing. I
Mm.
think the other thing as well you have to think about. I'm a little bit dyslexic when it comes to numbers. In the Rollmaster campaign, I have to get the GM to do
Mm.
my levels
Yep.
because he sits down and explains it. Well, if you're third level, if you put 16 into this rank, then unless you've got 5 in that one, then 37 goes there. That gives you a bonus of 6. Is that clear?
No, it's not clear. I have a very dear friend of mine is a very high level mathematician. And I will often just text him like pages of Kingbreaker and just be like, right, does the maths make sense on this? Because I can't I'm like you. It's called dyscalculia. It's more
Right.
common than people think, and it prevents the conceptualization of numbers in the same
Yeah,
way that dyslexia prevents the conceptualization of words and letters.
yeah, yeah.
So I will just send him this and just be like, right, does the maths actually work out here? Because I have no idea. And he'll look at it and go, right, I could kill you in one move by picking that, that, and that.
That's it, exactly
Yeah.
it, isn't
Oh,
it?
well,
Yeah,
I have to change that, that, and that then, don't I?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, balancing is tricky. I have
yeah.
discovered this in recent years. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the challenge I had with We Want the Gold because obviously it's skirmish, so there's this, there's that, there's your armor class and whatever I decided to call it. Um, and it's like when you write a book or you write a story, you know what's happening in your head, but the other person don't. So then you have that added thing with a set of rules.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? Is this clear? I
Am
mean,
I?
we've got some play testing and that kind of stuff, which helps a lot.
It does,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah,
Um, yeah, so I've been playtesting Kingbreaker for a while now, and it wasn't until the most recent playtest that I realized because I'd been play testing it in the way it's supposed to be played. Because the current version of Kingbreaker, the kind of prequel to the main game, which is coming out in a couple of years, is player versus player. And I'd been playtesting it in that kind of environment, one player versus another player. And I was like, I wonder if you could make a tournament out of this. I wonder if we could get everyone together and then have like a ranking as we kind of get closer and closer to the
right,
champion.
right. Yeah, yeah.
Worked brilliantly. Everyone had a great time. But it wasn't until that playtest that I noticed that, oh, if you put in like dedicated competition as an element to this game, you can then incentivize people to become very creative and extremely unbalanced in their character creation. So I'd have players just like, oh, well, this wording isn't very clear. So I'm going to use that to wipe out the entire board.
Right, right, right. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, no, you're right. I'm like, God, I had to change a lot of the page formats in the book in the end because the amount of like disclaimers I had to add to different rules to be like, this does not affect it, da 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 da. If da 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 does da 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 da. Like just
Mhm.
shunting down entire paragraphs worth of text. Everything. But yeah. But I think that's part of it, isn't it? That's part of the play testing to see how other
Yeah.
people put the rules set. Yeah.
Oh, totally, totally. And is this? I don't know that it's a modern thing or not, but competitiveness in gaming.
Yeah.
I mean, having said that, back in the day, they used to run D&D tournaments. I think certainly in the States.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but now we have whole events devoted to Warhammer or whatever it is that are pure competition days. Not something I've ever been interested in, really. I'm more interested in other dynamics within the game.
I'm more of a storyteller by nature.
Yeah,
With Kingbreaker, the thing I wanted to do was have a combat mechanic that tells the story as
right.
you're going along, right? Um, but right, this might sound controversial. I don't mean for it to sound controversial because I love this game, but I think it goes back to Magic the Gathering. Magic introduced a sort of role play adjacent world, right? This is a game that has several very distinct settings, and more recently also the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But this is a game that is built around taking your interpretation of the setting and then using that to combat someone in a very specific way. And I play weekly Magic games. I have A lot of decks that are just built to wipe out the opponent and that's it. But I feel as though that kind of mindset does bleed into D&D and RPGs more broadly. Magic was a big inspiration behind Kingbreaker. It was a huge inspiration in terms of like that player versus player interaction. And also it made me realize one of it put into words a thing that I've always kind of felt about RPGs, which is I hate stun mechanics. I despise them. I think they are awful, and I've never been able to put it into words. And it was only when playing Magic that I realized, oh, it's because it's literally stopping me from playing the game I'm enjoying. That's all it is. It's
Right,
really
right,
simple.
right, right.
If you're playing a game and then someone comes in and goes, well, I'm playing this card and that stops you from doing your thing. So, oh, well, I'm just going to go to the bar then. I'll
Yeah, I'll just sit out the next few turns and whatever.
just play what you sell and I'm just going to go get a pint or,
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah,
And that's something that D&D is guilty of. Pathfinder is extremely guilty of. I love need 7 different ways of paralyzing an enemy or being paralyzed. That's too many. That's too many ways. Um, and yeah, I wanted to avoid that in Kingbreaker. There are no paralyzing mechanics in Kingbreaker. The closest you get is a mechanic that reduces your stamina because that forces you to think creatively. That changes your play style. It doesn't eradicate your play style.
yeah. I think that's the secret is to get quite simple mechanics, but within that, you give the player choices and options based on, well, I've got it's almost like resource management in a way. I've only got so much of this. Do I put it there? Do I put it there? I
Yeah,
think that's where a lot of the enjoyment comes from a playing perspective, and then you use that to build into the narrative to keep the narrative going. I think.
usually. So I'm about to start up a new campaign, which is like a very heavily modified version of 5e, with my old standing RPG group. And one of the things that we've talked about is we've never really bothered engaging with things like exhaustion mechanics or even things like long rest, which is ridiculous when you think like this is a core mechanic of the game. And a lot of does gaming design, especially a lot of like pre-made modules, don't really interact with long rest mechanics. So it's okay, how can we do that? And we've just kind of hodgepodge together this rule set of like, you need X amount of supplies to set up a camp.
Yeah.
Very simple, right? Um, those supplies weigh X amount. I'm not bothering with a full encumbrance system because too many numbers.
Life's too short.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I've got stuff to do. I've got a wife that needs looking after. Like, I've got a dog. So there are lots of these little things that kind of then add into a narrative, right?
Yeah,
Well, we are traveling through the frozen north, we are exhausted and we need to rest, but there's no bloody food here. So now we have to go out of our way to hunt something,
yeah,
to find the supplies that we need to create a camp for the night. Suddenly, exhaustion and long rest become vital to the actual gameplay and also inform the narrative of that gameplay.
yeah,
And that's really important. I think a lot of, and I keep harping on about 5e, and I do think there are lots of things that it does well, but one thing it does terribly is actually putting the mechanics at the forefront of gameplay. And you see this because I think a lot of people got into 5th edition, especially in the last 10 years or so, via media. So Critical Role,
of course.
Dimension 20,
Yeah,
My Brother and Me, um, Dungeons and Daddies, they all brought in D&D as a storytelling method. And I think a lot of people now play the game expecting just the story, which
yeah,
is fine. There are
yeah,
definitely games for that. In fact, I make games that just do that.
sure.
But I do think that in doing so, you actually kind of lose a lot of the fidelity of the mechanics. And I think that's quite an important thing to lose as well. That I don't necessarily want people to play a game and then not interact with half of the mechanics that are in that game.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a very a good observation, and there are systems that will do that. If you want to almost gameplay a story based system, there's things that do that. D&D is maybe not the one
All right.
you would naturally choose, but that is everyone's gateway, isn't it? And even now, 40 whatever years later,
Mm.
you say RPGs, D&D.
Yeah.
When in fact, actually, from quite early days, we had bunnies and burrows and all sorts of weird,
Oh,
wonderful settings, and even more now. I don't think there's a genre or a time or that hasn't got its own RPG system somewhere. You know.
no, I can't think of any. And again, going back through old Dragon magazines, as you're kind of flicking through them, you can see different settings kind of taking like precedent briefly. So you go through it and it's like, oh, this has a whole section about like Slavic mythology
Mm,
because that's like the flavor of the month in the RPG sector for some reason in like mid 1985. And then you get to 1987, it's like Arabian Nights, which has some very uncomfortable to modern standards.
right. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
But like you can see this kind of this interesting through line as different people bringing their interests into the hobby. There's a really interesting article. I can't remember which magazine, which issue it's from, but it's Polynesian weapons, and it's adapting the classic sort of D&D Western fantasy swords, maces, shields, all that kind of stuff into their like Polynesian equivalents. So I can't remember what these are called. They're like sort of long carved shillelaghs
Oh,
almost.
yeah, with serrated bits on and all sorts. They're quite
That,
grim. So,
yeah, hammered bits of flint into sword blades to make swords. Like fascinating,
yeah,
absolutely awesome, and like yeah, to you can see these influences being pulled into the game like that.
yeah.
Uh, so it makes sense that it is everyone's first introduction to the RPG sphere because it is very adaptable. I'd argue perhaps too adaptable, but again, I do think that might just be me at this point.
I suppose then we get into potential issues of anything like that has to be handled the right way, doesn't it? We can get into cultural appropriation and all those kind of areas. So, by the same token, you're broadening people's outlooks to look at other cultures and take in other mythologies and folklores, I
Yeah,
guess.
I mean, it is important to note that when I just refer to them as Polynesian weapons, the magazine refers to them as primitive weapons, right?
Ooh,
Like, yeah, just see what I mean?
right. Yeah, yeah,
It's, it's the 80s, different time. It is also worth noting that D&D has its roots in a very specific, often quite troubling world. Gary Gygax himself was
yes,
a
yes,
pretty
yes,
terrible person
yeah,
in a
yeah,
lot of ways.
yeah.
Um, And so this is something that I've actually written about recently because I have a blog about game design and how it's changed over the years. And I wrote an article about how intelligent apes are represented in D&D. Because there's a really cool species called the Hakon in AD&D, very early AD&D as well, which are sentient gorillas that have a sort of like psychic ability to befriend other primates. And as such, they have this empire that has like baboon guard dogs. And it's very Planet of the Apes. Very cool. They love jewelry and they wear like beautiful robes and like, covered in bling. And it's really cool. They're really awesome. But they're also called, their leaders are called Ghana, which is an East African word which means chief, and obviously it's where we get the country Ghana from.
Right, right.
And there are these little elements where they are perhaps not as progressive as we'd perhaps see nowadays, right? But then in 2018, 2019, they brought in Spelljammer. They brought back Spelljammer from AD&D.
Right.
That introduced the Hadozi again. And the Hadozi had their origin story changed from a fairly normal, we are spacefaring monkey people to we are, and it's disgusting, but they are a race of escaped slaves who are known as ship monkeys and ship apes. And a lot of art that featured them had been modified by racists, let's be fair,
Yeah.
to have like these big lips and these like very clear caricatures of like minstrel shows and all this. And one of the things I wrote about was by refusing to reckon with its past as a quite racist in its quite racist origins, even the well-meaning racism is still racism, right?
Yeah, yeah,
By refusing to reckon with that, you end up repeating these same mistakes over and over again, where you don't stop.
absolutely.
Maybe the Hadozi are a bit racist. Like maybe that, maybe by making them escape slaves, we just haven't paid attention to the fact that you know we are recreating these quite racist tropes that we've done again and again. Um, you know, even things like ontologically evil species, like orcs, right? Orcs are always racist, right? Like that
But
is fundamental to them, right? If they're always evil, they are always racist. They are a racist caricature of a race, right?
yeah.
And by refusing to reckon with that, D&D has perhaps made mistake after mistake after mistake on top of how they produce these species.
Well, this is something even Tolkien struggled with this, right? He never reconciled that. Are orcs redeemable? Are they
Yes,
twisted elves? Are they something? All these different iterations he went through, and he never really squared it.
yeah,
Um, and I think back in the day, different times, you say we were just killing stuff and taking its gold,
of
which
course.
in itself, I mean, colonialism
Very
much,
colonial, right? It's very
right?
colonial.
Right. But
Um,
but then we live in a time where the president of the fucking United States can put out what he put out this week,
yes.
and a lot of I don't know about a lot of people, certain people don't bat an eyelid at that. It's
Not
quite
racist. It's
amazing.
a funny joke. It's not just a funny joke. This is the continuation of a long and storied tradition of racism. Like,
Mm,
and yeah, I think now more than ever we have to be careful about what we consider play because play informs reality,
yes,
right? If we are going to engage in a setting that does have ontologically evil races, we have to be very careful that we don't take that into our real lives when ICE are kidnapping people off the streets and shooting people in the head because they are ontologically evil,
yeah,
right?
totally.
We have to be really careful with that. Um, and I don't want to get, I mean, I'm about to say I don't want to get too political. I've been talking about bloody racism for the last like 10 minutes. But one thing that I wanted to do with Kingbreaker is quite a political game in that you are killing a king, like in a play setting, but this is a game that is very specifically about political anarchy, about political republicanism, about no single person deserves to have sovereignty over everyone, and that sovereignty in itself can be a threat, can
Yeah,
be dangerous, can be used to manipulate people and hurt people. So there is a big portion of Kingbreaker that is like, yeah. And the way you solve that is by getting rid of the tyrants, right? That's how you fix that problem. If there are tyrants, get rid of the bloody tyrant, and that solves the problem of tyrants.
uh,
So yeah, as I go through the game, I need to kind of reckon with that a lot closer, I think. At the minute, because it is player versus player, this isn't quite in the foreground yet, but it very much is simmering in the
but
background.
it's simmering now. Yeah,
Yeah.
very interesting. Very interesting.
Mm.
So perhaps to conclude, then, I noticed one of the other things you do is you run pro GM sessions. You run a lot of D&D sessions or other
I do,
sessions
yes.
outside of your own sort of play group.
Yeah, say I do a lot of professional GMing, and I'm very open to commissions pretty much all over the country. I'm more than happy to do online stuff. I do a lot of stuff with kids at the minute. A lot of like local councils, for example, have been trying to work out how they can get kids out of their homes into, public settings that are more sociable, more sort of like accessible, more inclusive. And one of the things that a lot of councils have found is that D&D is perfect for youngsters, as you and I will know because we both played these games as kids, right?
Exactly.
Um, so I did a lot of work recently with a library up here in the East Midlands, well, library and museum, where I was commissioned to write a mini campaign for a group of five youngsters aged, I think, 13 through to 17. That was based on the museum's current exhibit,
Oh,
which
nice.
um, and it's in Mansfield. I don't know if you've ever been to Mansfield. There's not a lot there, but what it does have is an astonishing collection of taxidermied birds. They are fantastic. They have this incredible collection of taxidermied birds and some reptiles as well. So I was like, okay, what can I do with this? All right, a necromancer has taken over the museum. You guys have to stop him. He is resurrecting the birds and making an evil bird army. Very
Brilliant.
fun, very silly. The kids had a great time with it. At one point, I don't know if you're familiar with secretary birds. Have you seen those guys?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
For the
yeah.
uninitiated, these are like snake killing birds of, I think, Zimbabwe. They are like tall, glamorous. They look like sort of sexy models, if
Yeah,
sex.
definitely the fashion models of the bird world, aren't they? The way they walk and everything. Yeah, they are.
I'd taken one of those and I'd reskinned a, I think it might have been a cockatrice or something along those lines into that, into a secretary bird. And because these kids, I'd encourage them to look around the museum first to get some ideas of like what they might be facing. When I described this thing, with its wings and these great big feathery eyelashes and these long legs, one kid sort of went, "Oh my God, it's a secretary bird. They they kill snakes." I was like, "That's right." And this one's coming for you. And the kid went, "Boys, we're cooked." Like the investment of it was, I just stuff goes right. That feeds me for months. That kind of
Outstanding,
yeah.
outstanding.
Yeah. So a lot of, I'll do a lot of professional jamming with youngsters, and it's a very different game to playing with adults.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I've coined the term bullshit jujitsu, which if people listen to this podcast, take nothing away from me, take this away. If you work with kids, if you do anything with kids, bullshit jujitsu is how you solve kids being obstinate. The kid will go, I do something stupid. They'll go, I'm going to shoot, I'm going to take my bow and arrow and I'm going to shoot that window out. Okay, cool. You take the bullshit as it comes towards you and you flip it over your shoulder like in jujitsu. You go, cool, that window open. There's a bird out there and he's coming in and the bird's coming inside and now you have to fight the bird, right? And
Nice.
do it necessarily as a punishment. It's not about discouraging that kind of silliness because that silliness is part of play. You
Yeah.
can't get away. Even adults do this constantly, right?
Yeah.
And we just don't, it's just not often in as silly terms as this. But you take that silliness and you say, that silly thing that you just did is a perfectly valid response to this world that we are in. The world is now going to respond by doing something silly in return. It is, if you are going to, I did some work a while back in a creative writing workshop with some kids. And one of the kids was like, I think one of these characters should be RuPaul from RuPaul's Drag Race. This was a group of queer kids working with a lot of LGBT youths. So I'm like, okay, cool. What does that mean? What do you want from that, right? So it's cool to have RuPaul in this. I agree. It's really cool to have RuPaul in there. What does she mean to this story? What is she bringing to this story, right? And then it kind of got this conversation going about homage and how we bring in cameos and stuff like that.
Right.
That is really important in D&D as well. If someone says, I do something silly, where you go, why? What are you trying to get out of that? And in doing so, how do you want the world to respond to you? What are you
Yeah.
trying to get out of this encounter? So if you take away nothing else, listeners, if you take away nothing else, bullshit jujitsu. It's incredible. It will work wonders. You'll be amazed. But yeah, professional jamming is a delight. It's so much fun.
I was going to say I can apply that to a lot of adult groups.
Yeah,
Low-key
I like it as
groups.
well.
I've got a couple of incidents springing to mind already from recent sessions.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Also a big fan of if it can happen to me, it can happen to you. Player came up with the idea of like wild shaping as a druid into a bird, flying above the enemy, wild shaping into a cow, dropping onto the enemy. It's like, cool. No, that's brilliant. This was in a series, a campaign that was based on Greek mythology. So I was like, okay, cool. You're going to fight the equivalent of Circe in this world. Circe, famous for transforming things into animals. If you could do that to me, I could do it to you. And she'll turn into a whale. So, you know, that always works. That's yeah. That kind of like push and pull is always a lot of fun in RPGs.
And it strikes me for kids especially, that's such a great way of stimulating imagination, of helping kids understand narrative, consequences to their actions, problem solving, team building. There's always this thing in the corporate world which I dipped my toe in briefly and I hastily pulled it back out
Very
of
smart.
the dreaded role playing session. I'm the customer, you're the whatever.
Yeah.
Um, so it has its uses there, but it strikes me something that sparks the imagination as much as D&D is great for kids, and I dare say a lot of adults as well.
Oh, definitely. I got chatting. It actually may have been at Bedford when we met. I had a chap come up to me who was like, "Yeah, I love D&D because I'm autistic and talking to people is quite difficult. It requires a part of my brain that I just don't use very often. So what I love about D&D is it allows me to practice that side of myself without any stakes. I'm not having to I can practice someone who is much more gregarious than myself, someone who can talk much more freely than myself. But in doing so, I'm not putting my social standing at risk. I'm not
Yeah,
putting my professional standing at risk. I can practice interacting with other people outside of work or outside of schooling, that kind of thing. And yeah, and you see it a lot with kids as well. A lot of neurodiverse kids get a lot out of role play because it helps them practice skills that they are going to need, but don't necessarily have the capacity to practice in day-to-day life, you know?
well, you don't do where in day-to-day life do you get to practice going into a shop and bargaining for something or that kind of interaction? You're doing it or you're not doing it,
Exactly.
right? Whereas if you're the bard in the town and you've got that layer of protection almost, this isn't real, but the interaction is real, isn't
Yeah.
it? You know.
See how that interaction plays out. Let's see what you can do
Mm,
aid that interaction playing out. And yeah, because it's very low stakes, people are much more free and open to
yeah.
interaction, which is brilliant. It encourages people to be a lot more creative in their day-to-day lives, in the way that they solve problems, in the way that they interact with their friends and family and peers. Yeah.
Excellent. Very interesting. Very interesting stuff. So, Kingbreaker, do you have a release date? You say you're in beta testing now?
Yeah, so still in beta testing. We are planning on kickstarting the finished release later on this year. I'm in the process of kickstarting another game at the minute, but that's a part of my right-hand path system. So if people are interested, the Gastronomancer, it's currently live on Kickstarter. It will be, as of time of recording, for another 20 days or so. So maybe not by the time this comes out. Um, with Kingbreaker, we are looking to crowdfund towards the end of this year, so we're looking probably around autumn. I'd say probably September.
Right.
Um, yeah, if people are interested and kind of want to follow, sealightstudios.net is probably the best place to find me. I'm also on Instagram as well, Sealight Studios. Um, I'm often on Reddit, but I don't recommend following me on Reddit because I'm a lot more confrontational there. Uh,
Confrontational on Reddit? Surely not.
right? It turns out when you have certain thoughts about how disabled people can play games, people on Reddit not very pleasant to you. Uh,
Oh
but yeah,
God. I mean, well, I'm still on Twitter for some odd reason. I
oh,
don't know why,
so
but I mean, there's another big issue, right? Social media. Can't live with it, can't live without it.
oh yeah, it's very interesting as a creator seeing how it's changing and how it's becoming much less focused about the actual content and much more focused on brand recognition and stuff like that. But discussion for another time. And frankly, I can't be bothered to have that discussion. I'm
I
in the
know, I know. It is what it is, and that's it. There you go. That's
yeah.
it, pretty much. Yeah.
But yeah, so if you and we have a mailing list as well, which I really recommend because I will put out articles and stuff on that. Most recent article was a part of a longer dev diary, but I've also put out, custom spells for D&D. My article about monkeys in D&D was via this series. So yeah, really recommend the mailing list. You can get that by signing up to Sea Light Studios on the website. But yeah, couple places that you can find me if you're looking.
Nice one, nice one. Well, thanks very much for coming in today, Liam. It's been a great chat, and there's a few little things we could spin off there. So perhaps we'll chat again in the future. Certainly, when Kingbreaker does come out, then I think we'll get together again and see how things are going.
Amazing.
Brilliant. Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.